One of my big concerns when it comes to modern thought is that we've fallen into a state in which we see things pretty much only in pieces, only in terms of the concrete. Whereas I believe it's really important to see things whole. In that respect, I'd like to raise the idea of metaphor. The place to go into that for me is Aesop's Fables, where I've always, from the time I was, I don't know, 5 maybe, loved Aesop's Fables. There are these stories in it that, like the little boy who cried wolf. The boy keeps fooling the townspeople, pretending there's a wolf. They come to protect him, and then later there actually is a wolf descending upon his flock of sheep. And when he sends out the alarm, nobody comes because they're tired of his making a fool of himself. And people will often say, it's like the little boy who cried wolf, meaning somebody who loses credibility earlier on and then won't be believed when they need to be believed. And they say that apropos of a situation in which there is no wolf, there are no sheep to be protected, there is no townspeople coming out to, it's a metaphor, it's a pattern, which the Aesop's fable lives for a few thousand years because it's a pattern that gets enacted in the human world repeatedly. And it provides a language to people who share the cultural background to know about the little boy who cried wolf. Or don't count your chickens before they're hatched. Or any of a number of things. That we are able to communicate to each other, pointing to a pattern that tells us something about how the world works. So it is a phenomenon in the world, which is a reality, that if somebody acts like the little boy who cried wolf, there will be a price to be paid, and that nobody will give them credence when they need them to give them credence. Take a proverb which does essentially the same job of looking at a pattern. I mean, one will frequently hear people say, "Strike while the iron is hot." It's a wonderful metaphor. I mean, I don't know how many people, when they hear it, even think about what it means about striking and the iron being hot. But it's got to do with working iron like a blacksmith did, that you, in order to bend the metal, you got to make the iron hot enough so that the blows of the hammer will move the iron in the way that the skilled blacksmith will do. But people use that saying in a lot of situations where there is no iron, there's nothing that's hot. What there is something on that pattern, that there is a time now in which things can be influenced. There is an opportune moment here, which you've got to use, because if you wait and fail to act while the iron is hot, you will find that circumstances are no longer something that you can shape according to your desire. I kind of wonder about how should we think about that pattern? I wish that I could find a a paragraph that I wrote down 20 years ago. A woman who was talking about, I think she was actually talking about Shakespeare, but she had a paragraph that basically said that metaphor is the language in which we can see sort of the ultimate reality, or something like that. I apologize for not being able to give it to you. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up at all. But there was a sense in which she was arguing that in these patterns, we've got something which is more real than the concrete. And that's actually kind of relevant to what I try to do in my life's work. I'm trying to make the case that there are some forces at work in the human world that are at the center of the human drama. And we should understand what those forces are, because one of them is a destructive force, and it threatens the survival of human civilization. And I've encountered the idea that these concepts are just social constructs. That they're not really real. Even had people argue that even the temperature is not real. All that's real is the degree of motion of molecules. I think that misses really what's going on in a world where things are very densely interconnected. I mean, what's more real? In a particular town, in a particular place, somebody sends up a firework that explodes over where a crowd can go ooh and ah. I agree that that's real. But is that more real than that there's an American tradition that on the 4th of July, the towns all over the country will celebrate the occasion with a show of fireworks? Is that tradition not part of the reality? Or let's say you've got a couple of people walking along, and they're at the concrete level. They're utilizing their mouth and vocal cords to make sounds. I mean, that's as concrete as you can get, I suppose, to put it that way. They're communicating with each other. They're speaking in words. Are any of those more real than to look at the English language as a reality that exists in the human world? I don't think they're more real. Each one of us is a human being. Are we individually more real than the human genome? I don't think so. I think, in some ways, in terms of what's actually going on in the world, I think often the abstract level is the more real one. When I talk about a force, I mean, we could talk about, what a particular good, decent conservative and does politically, and or we could look at it, some of the larger forces which shaped them, the things which may have given them certain attitudes on race, or things that made them more vulnerable to believing obvious lies told by established authorities, or that gave them an undue appetite for conflict with another group of people that they've demonized. Or we can look at the whole process by which all of these things came into existence over time through the network of cause and effect. I think we discover there a force of brokenness, which is not real in all exactly the same ways as a stainless steel nail you can hold in your hands, but very real in terms of it being an essential part of the human reality that helps determine how things develop. The concrete and the and specific, and the level of the general and the forces can be envisioned in terms of the water and the wave. If you look at the surface of the sea with a wave moving through it, you see something moving. You can see it. There's something approaching the shore, say, when you're looking out there, and breaking. When it gets to a certain depth of water, it breaks. But before it breaks, you can see the undulation coming from out there on the sea toward the shore. You can see there's something moving. At the same time, if you were to look at the molecules that of the water where the wave is to be found, these molecules are basically moving up and down. The wave is not the water molecules. The water molecules are providing the medium through which the wave is moving. And that's how it is with the forces that I try to show in my Better Human Story. There is something pushing a pattern of brokenness through the human world that gets embodied in particular things at particular moments, but that transmits its pattern of brokenness forward in time. The force of evil is the wave. The things that are bobbing up and down in the transmission of that wave. They're the concrete, the water molecules. We need to deal in our minds, not just with the immediate and the concrete. Donald Trump is hard not to pay attention to. And he is important in this picture. But the real action has to be understood in terms of the force that's driving this thing. A force that we can see in the same way as we can see the wind in the swaying of the trees and the flapping of the clothes on the line. This is a battle not just Donald Trump versus Joe Biden. Each of them is, in a sense, functioning as the champion of different forces. You could call them democracy in the case of Biden, up against fascism in the form of Trump. But if you look at the whole process by which these waves gathered their force and moved through the water, ultimately you can see that what we're dealing with is one of the many battlefields in history in which a force for the good and a force for the evil are contending over which shall shape the human world. These are realities, and the fundamental drama of human civilization is which of those forces is going to prevail. It is on that hinges the question, will human civilization get its act together to survive for the long haul, or will it end its story in some act of self-inflicted catastrophe? That's what the battle of good and evil ultimately is boiling down to in the case of a civilization-creating creature. And it is important that we recognize that it's not just the immediate stuff. We are engaged in a millennial-long struggle. We are engaged in a global struggle right now between democracy and fascism. We are engaged in a struggle between those two forces as they are represented in the American power system right now. And it's all coming down to a showdown in the 2024 election. All parts of the same picture. If you're interested in seeing how that picture can be presented in a really coherent way, I hope you'll check out what I've laid out in a variety of ways and some detail on my website, abetterhumanstory.org. It puts into an importantly different light how to understand what kind of creatures we are, what has determined why there's so much ugliness in the human world and in the human history leading up to us from the beginnings of civilization. And what do we need to do as a species if we're going to be a success for the life on Earth rather than the means by which it all gets destroyed? Thanks.